Hey guys, Marsningan here, bringing you another Dragon Ball Z Dokkan battle video. And so, of course, later tonight, or tomorrow morning if it's in the UK like me, we are going to be getting the EZA for physical Bardock. So, I talked about his details in an earlier video that came out today. And of course, we are going to do, as always, the team building guide for this EZA. So, there is no page on the wiki for it just yet. But we do know, thanks to the leaks from the data download, that the category required for this EZA is going to be Terrifying Conquerors. So, did a video the other day speculating about the category, and it definitely seemed like this would be the most likely. You can make a very crazy team with this setup, and there are a lot of LRs on here, because remember, for an LR EZA, you need to have the legendary power link active in order to be able to do big damage. So if you have a whole team of TURs, you are still going to be able to get through with the right team build, but you're not going to be doing the sort of damage you would normally on that team. So it's going to take a little bit longer, especially when you get towards the later stages. So as always with my team building guides, we will go over my top picks and honourable mentions, and then if there's any units that you think I missed out or we should have talked about in more detail, then obviously let me know down below in the comments section. So like the video if you find it helpful, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and let's go ahead and jump straight in. So obviously your first choice for leader, if you have him, is probably going to be Cooler, because he is the Terrifying Conqueror's lead. 3 key, 130 to HP, attack and defense 170. He's a very strong unit. Obviously, against one enemy, he only supports transformation boost allies. So some of the units on this team will fall under that category, but not all of them. But obviously that's just going to be a nice little extra buff. And then of course, because you are fighting a pure Saiyan, because you're going up against Bardock, if you don't want to use them as a support unit, once you get to turn 3, you will be able to transform into the final form Cooler, where you get guaranteed crits. So he's going to be doing reasonable damage, but again, remember, without the legendary power link, he's not going to be doing the kind of damage that you would normally see. He does infinitely stack attack, but obviously EZA stages never normally go for that many turns, so he's not going to build up to any sort of crazy numbers, and he's going to be doing a little bit of reduced damage compared to what you're used to. But obviously he's going to be a very, very strong option. And then, of course, we do actually have an LR leader for Terrifying Conquerors, which is the LR Turles. His lead is 4 key and then 130 across the board. I do think it's better to bring a leader with a higher leader skill and then just bring Turles on the team if you have him. Obviously, Turles is probably going to be one of the best units on this team. You know, he's the right typing, he's in the category, he does crazy damage. The only problem, of course, can be some of his link partners, which we will talk about later on, not necessarily being the best units. But he himself is obviously very, very powerful. I wouldn't be surprised if he one-shots Bardock in the early stages. If you get the 24 key and then get like the additional off of his passive, he could probably take him out all by himself, because he is incredibly powerful. And if you wanted to go the route of running a full LR team, so you have legendary power active all the time, then you can obviously run him as a leader. So next up we have the Demon King Piccolo. I've included him here as kind of like a last resort. I say last resort, but he's like a free-to-play option for a leader, because he has Terrifying Conquerors 3 key and 120 to stats. So if you don't have Cooler or LR Turles, then he can be a decent replacement leader. He's an alright unit. You have to remember that you need to pick up a certain amount of orbs. It's 5 or more orbs, and then he will have damage reduction, because Bardock is not a Dragon Ball Saga World Tournament or Dragon Ball Seekers character, so he's not going to transform on turn 1, and chances are in an EZA you're probably not going to get to turn 7, so you're not going to see the transformed version of him, so you have to be very careful when it comes to collecting the orbs. Otherwise this guy could potentially take big damage. So next up we have the LR Prime Battle Frieza. He's obviously going to be very, very good on this team. He's a very strong unit, potentially the best free-to-play unit in the game. I think the argument at the moment is probably between him and Roshi still. He's incredibly strong. Obviously, if you put him in slot 1 or 3, he gets extra ki. You're going to be fighting a super type enemy, so he's going to be getting 3 extra ki as well. So getting his 18 ki super is going to be pretty straightforward. Or once you get to the later stages and it does start to get a little bit harder, you could deliberately go for the 12 ki super, because then he greatly raises his own defense. So he is going to be very, very strong in this event. Type advantage, like Turles in the early stages. If you can get lucky with crits, maybe with an additional, he could probably just finish off Bardock all by himself, which would be pretty appropriate, I guess, all things considered. So yeah, he is definitely a must-have on the team. He's a free-to-play unit. He does have an extreme types leader skill 4 ki and 90%, which is a little bit low, but if you're running him opposite like a friend cooler, that's still a pretty decent leader skill overall. So he could be another free-to-play option if you are missing some of the others as your leader. So next up, we have, of course, the big man himself, potentially the new best unit in the game, the LR Full Power Freezer. You can make a Sworn Enemies team pretty much entirely made of freezers that are on Terrifying Conquerors as well. But, you know, there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of units that don't cross over into that leader skill, like Cooler and Turles and things like that. But technically, you could make a team with double freezer leads. Obviously, he's insanely powerful. You're not fighting a Goku, so he's not getting guaranteed crits. But there is a super class enemy, so he's getting extra attack. You're not going to go long enough for the part of his passive to wear off. So he's just going to be doing crazy numbers. And of course, if he's in slot 1 and getting hit, he does a guaranteed additional super. If he's in slot 2 or 3, he has a chance to do an additional super. So he's going to be able to put out a ton of damage. And obviously, we're already potentially bringing a bunch of other Wicked Bloodline units on the team. So he's going to link up really well with everybody. The only downside for this particular setup is I would probably advise against bringing the int third form freezer, because of the fact that he's got type disadvantage. In the earlier stages, he'd probably be okay, especially if he super attacks multiple times, but especially when you get later on, you're probably going to get one shot by a super, so I wouldn't risk it, but he can link up well with the other freezer and cooler units that we're bringing on the team. Now, next up we have the STR Full Power Freezer. So, for an EZA event, the same name update thing doesn't apply. So, you can't bring this guy and this guy on the team at the same time. So, if you have this guy, even though he's type neutral, he's just way better. I wouldn't bring this guy. He's still good, but he lowers your HP if you only get the 12 key super. And he kind of requires you to be on low health in order to get his full potential, which is pretty dangerous for an EZA. I mean, you can't heal, so you don't really have much control over your HP. But yeah, I just think he's good to include on the team if you don't have the new one, but the new one is definitely better if you do have him. So next up we have the King Cold and Mecha Freezer. Now, bear in mind, of course, they are a free-to-play unit, and they are a Wicked Bloodline leader, so because of the crossover with this category, you could quite easily, if you have no other options, run them as a leader, and then just run a bunch of freezers that are Terrifying Conquerors, and then that would obviously work as well. They're not too bad. They do raise Extreme Class Allies attack by 30% for 2 turns on their 18 key super, so that even if you have them off rotation, that benefits the units on the next turn, which is pretty useful. And then, of course, the more Wicked Bloodline allies you have on the team, as long as you have 3 other allies, you can get their full passive boost. Unfortunately, Bardock is not a Super Saiyan in this event, so they don't get their extra key, but they can obviously still be very good when you are running a very Wicked Bloodline-centric version of the team. Then next up we have another couple of free-to-play options here. We have the Barbody and Dabura LR from the Battlefield shop, and then there's the free-to-play Barbody and Boo. These two link up really, really well together. So if you're really struggling for units to fill out this team, or especially if you're struggling for LRs so you can get that legendary power link to do the extra damage, this rotation works out really, really well. So obviously they're on Terrifying Conquerors, so fits perfectly. Definitely a solid option for free to play. If you have like a big whale box and you have your choice of like any unit in the game, I probably wouldn't bring them. But for a free-to-play person, they're going to be a very good setup. So I definitely would recommend them if you need to fill slots on your team. So next up, we have Turles. I only included him here because he will supercharge the LR Turles. Obviously, he's his best link partner unless you're a massive whale and you have copies of the TUR. The only problem is, of course, that nowadays, until he gets his EZA, he's a bit of a defensive liability in harder content. Someone did comment when I posted a screenshot of my team earlier that I intend to use, that if the LR doesn't finish off Bardock in that turn, then it's likely that the AGL Turles could then get slapped up, which is true. But then, as somebody pointed out in a reply, it's an easy A. It doesn't cost stamina. So, I mean, if you get to stage 10 and then Turles gets you killed on like turn 1, you just start again. But he's going to be very good for boosting the LR and making the LR do insane damage. I mean, mine is 90% at the moment, and linked up with this AGL Turles without another support unit on the rotation, he hits well over 7 million attack stat on his 18 key super. So he just makes the LR Turles go absolutely crazy, but you definitely do need to be careful when it comes to him taking attacks, because his defense is not the best. Next up, we have Golden Frieza. I included the tech one here, but you could bring the tech one or the AGL one. They are obviously here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to tank all the attacks. When you get into the later stages, if you find yourself starting to struggle with the amount of damage that he's putting out, then just bring a Golden Frieza and put him in front of the majority of the attacks. And there you go. They're not going to do crazy damage, because even though the tech one does more damage than the AGL one, they're not LRs, they don't have a legendary power link, so they're not going to do insane damage in an LR EZA event, but they are just there to be your tanks. So they are very useful in that role. Next up, we have the EZA Tech Transforming Frieza. Again, remember to bear in mind, like for all of these TURs that we talk about, they can be useful on the team, but they're not going to go off like they do in other events, because they are going to be suffering from that little bit of damage reduction, not having the legendary power link. But that being said, this Frieza is very powerful after his EZA. He also heals at the start of each turn as he transforms up through the various phases. Depending how high you want to go, if you stop at stage 10, like, it's not going to take that many turns, so maybe you'll see the third form Frieza, but you're probably not going to see much further than that. Even if you try and go to the higher stages, I don't know if you'll necessarily get to Golden Frieza, but obviously as he transforms, he just becomes more and more powerful, but he still heals at the start of the turn. I mean, even if you only ever get to like second form, he's going to be pretty solid in this event, and the healing is always nice, bearing in mind that it's an EZA and you can't use items. So next up, we have this Frieza, the only int unit that I included. The only reason why we would include this guy is obviously we are fighting a Goku family enemy, which means that he guards and is a support unit. He has damage reduction because his guard will be active. Now, on stage 10, if he takes a super attack, he might still take a little bit of damage, but he's not going to get you one shot. And obviously, he's going to also fulfill that support role as well, which just helps out the LRs. Even if you have him as a third slot floating unit, if you have LRs as your rotations to get that legendary power link, he's going to be giving them a nice little bit of a buff, while not being a liability in slot 3, because he does at least guard and have damage reduction. And he's a free-to-play unit, so he's another solid option for everybody. Next up, we have Bojack. I probably should have put Bojack a bit higher up in the list, because you can, again, with all the crossover, you can run Bojack as your leader and make a full Space Traveling Warriors team, and it covers like most of the LRs that we talked about at the beginning. And in fact, I definitely should have put him a bit earlier, because his Space Traveling Warriors leader skill is 3 key and HP attack and defense 170. So his leader skill is actually better than Cooler's, because Cooler's is 130 to HP and then 170 attack and defense. But units like Cooler himself is on Space Traveling Warriors, Turles is on Space Traveling Warriors, the new Frieza, this Frieza, these guys are all on Space Traveling Warriors. So Bojack is actually probably a better leader option than Cooler, depending on how you want to build your team. So yeah, he's a very solid option. And of course, with all those units being Space Traveling Warriors, even if you don't run him as your leader, you can just have him on the team as a support unit, and he's going to be really, really strong. So definitely a good option. Next up, we have Sylas. I thought this guy should be an honorable mention. He's a very underrated unit. Obviously, if you haven't been playing the game for a while, or you didn't really summon much on the heroes banners, chances are you probably don't have him, or if you do, maybe you only have like one copy of him. But he's actually pretty decent. He gives a buff to time traveler allies, which there aren't really many of on the team, as well as artificial life forms, which again, there's not many of. And then when you get to turn 5, he transforms and actually does become a pretty solid damage dealer. He's a slot 2 or 3 unit though, because he gets most of his defense on super attack, but he can be pretty solid as an honorable mention if you need to fill that last spot with somebody. Then we have the Jace from the Ginyu Force. Now, the reason he's going to be good, obviously, is for the seeing enemy super attacks. Now, the only problem is if you're not bringing another Ginyu Force ally, which we probably won't be, unless, like, the Tech LR Ginyu gets a surprise easy A, because that wasn't in the data download. So he's not going to have the extra defense, but he's still got reasonable stats, and he sees the enemy super attacks, which is the most important thing. And obviously he has type advantage. He's also on Space Traveling Warriors, so he's going to be really useful. Even in the later stages, he might take a little bit of damage from the normal attacks, but you can see where the supers are going to be, so you can keep him out of the way of those. And then that helps you out, so you don't have to have any type neutral units take a super. So he definitely is a useful utility unit on the team, whilst also providing support, so he's very strong. And then the last honourable mention here, I thought we might as well mention the STR Demon King Piccolo. I'd only really recommend bringing him if you are running the tech one, because they make a good rotation together. They don't have like a really good link partner outside of each other. Like, they have a few decent links on the team, like Nightmare, obviously Fierce Battle. Thirst for Conquest is fairly common on some of these units, but that's about it really. So you probably only want to run this guy if you're running the LR. I wouldn't recommend running him on his own. Obviously the LR can be used as a leader without this guy, but if you're not running the LR, I wouldn't run this guy at all. So Terrifying Conquerors, obviously the Cooler Armored Squadron can be a fill-in leader as well if you don't have them. The Raccoon and the free-to-play Cooler have really low leader skills, so I wouldn't necessarily use those. Baby could be pretty decent. He obviously gets a buff when you're fighting a Pure Saiyan, but he's not the craziest of units until he gets his Easy A. Obviously the Ginyu Force units, until they get their Easy A, is probably not super good. And then the Int ones, whilst Bojack is still very strong to this day, especially if you are running the STR one, he does have type disadvantage, so him taking a super in this event would obviously be very bad. So I think you want to focus mainly on STR, and obviously you want to try and bring as many LRs as possible. I guess Rildo is okay as well, but yeah, there's a couple of units here that would still be pretty good. Dabura can link up well with the Barbody and Dabura LR if you bring them. This Vegeta can be pretty decent, but you definitely want to focus mainly on STR and the LRs as well. So there you go. Like I said earlier on in the video, if there's any units that you think I missed or should have talked about in more detail, let me know down below in the comments, and let me know what your team build is going to look like. So I will be live streaming the EZA when it comes out, so keep an eye out on the channel. Make sure you are subscribed, hit that bell button, and then YouTube will let you know when the stream is going to start. And yeah, hopefully I will see you guys there. So let me know your teams down below. And yeah, this should be a pretty easy one. There's a lot of units with a lot of crossover across the categories, so hopefully all you guys out there can make a good team for this one. So that is going to be it for the video, guys. This has been the Masked Ningen. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Check out the links down below for the Discord and the merch store, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one.